start with Nick Wright before getting into Joe Biden. Nick Wright, my take, I find him to be entertaining. I don't think that he's fundamentally dishonest. I actually do think that his sports opinions are his opinions. I am frustrated by some of the arguments that he makes because I feel as though he's overstating the case for his own perspective. And you could accuse him of dishonesty for that. And I also think that he holds on to his opinions for so long in hopes for that validation that it often to me just feels like let it go. It's time to move on. But he sticks to his initial Bayesian prior. That can be frustrating. You have a much more critical perspective of him, as do many of my subscribers who get mad at me when I have him on the podcast. What is your take?
I mean, my take is I just think that so the first thing is if he was just an idiot, I wouldn't mind at all because
clearly
sports media is full of idiots. I think that what I find so frustrating about him is that so often when I watch clips of his show, it will be sort of a alternating pattern of like really insightful and smart things to say, and then just like these dipshit provocations that to me just seem so obviously orchestrated to sort of drive rage bait engagement. And I know that he kind of has to do that, or he feels that he has to do that because, he's on Fox Sports 1, right? Like he's on a linear cable network, which is a whole other world. So if you look at like Dan Le Batard, who I like a lot, I do think Dan Le Batard does sort of the like sighing, disappointed dad thing sometimes, but he is presented like a really, clear alternative to shouting at each other sports talk. And he's very bright and has a cool team and he does a lot of good stuff. But he also is running his own shop and it's independent and independently funded. And so he doesn't have to necessarily maybe do the stuff that you have to do to be a big deal and get your own cable show. But like, look at his relationship to the fans of the Buffalo Bills, right? I should preface this by saying I'm not a Bills fan. I'm a Bears fan. My father was from Chicago. He passed all his teams on to me. I find it so deeply bizarre to intentionally start this blood feud when your team is the dominant dynasty of the era with the fans of a team that have been kicked in the face more than any other team in NFL history. And to get into this just deeply nasty, like ugly, constant sniping at them for no reason. After that playoff game this past year, he immediately takes to Instagram Live and is just like, outwardly mocking Bills fans. And it's like, why? Right? Like they've never won anything. Like if you're gonna do this, well, you can't do it for the San Francisco 49ers, right? You couldn't have this sort of like.
Does.
But what I'm saying is like
Anthony, yeah.
But nothing is the same. But nothing is the same as his relationship to the Bills have been for several years, and it is really gross and like to me transcends the line in the way that he sort of treats them and talks about them. And the reason why is right. The Bills have a active and passionate fan base. They're particularly passionate and active on Twitter. And so that creates this nexus of this vortex of negativity and anger and hatred, which is what he's doing, because every time that he does that, he is creating this sort of spiral of negative emotion, which then gets attention and raises his profile, which is the same reason for the way that he engages in the LeBron versus Jordan debate, which is maximally trolling, showing the least possible respect for the opposite position, and doing it in a way that is designed to farm negative energy. He's like, like in Ghostbusters when like Gozar is like sucking up all the negative energy in the city, or in Ghostbusters 2 when it's like flowing as the ooze underneath the sewer. Like that's a thing in sports media that people do, is create this huge pile of just pure negative energy, use that for clout. And no one does it more shamelessly right now than Nick Wright.
So this is okay. The negative energy thing is interesting because I actually do think there's a value to it. You could call it rage bait, but they come up with a counterexample. Pat McAfee went on this rant during the midseason last season in defense of Brock Purdy, who I actually think you and Nick have somewhat aligned opinions on Brock Purdy, incidentally. But it was this defense of Brock Purdy. If he walked on water, you'd ask why he can't swim, blah, 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 yada, yada, yada. As a Niner fan, means nothing to me. Means absolutely nothing to me because Pat McAfee never criticizes anybody. It's always about sucking up to athletes. So they come on a show and that show has a certain value that the athlete is comfortable and you get a different side of them. But it doesn't matter if somebody who only praises is praising. It's interesting, I think, to people when a player or a team that Bill Simmons doesn't like prevails and they listen, they tune in to how the conversation is going to go with Simmons and Russillo. And I think it's interesting to people when a team or a player that Nick Wright has been slighting. I think Nick said that there was a 0% chance the Buffalo Bills would make the playoffs after they had their early season swoon. And when the Bills make the playoffs, I think there are Bills fans, there are people who they want to see him take his medicine. They want to see him with the co-host actually have to answer for his prior words. I don't have as negative a view of that as you do. I look at it as if the Bills fans don't want that kind of content, they don't have to tune in to that particular show. I don't know why on earth, if I was a Bills fan the day after they lose a playoff game, I would not be watching First Things First. I would avoid it. I feel like they've got that choice. And I don't look at that kind of product as something that is diminishing the general conversation.
I mean, look, I guess this is just sort of a sacred belief of mine. You're not a fan when your team is winning, right? Like I said, my dad was born in Chicago. He brought his sports teams to his sons. I grew up as a child watching Michael Jordan, right? And that was dope. That was really awesome. And I graduated out of high school and Jordan retired for a second time. And what I came to understand is that I was not actually a Bulls fan during that dynasty. I was a Bulls fan in the years after the dynasty, right? So like the immediate years after the dynasty, like when literally like you're trying to talk yourself into guys with names like deBoer Bogaric, right? Like when Jerry Krause is playing a large role in your life, right? When Marcus Fizer from Iowa State turns out to be one of the biggest busts in NBA draft history. When I genuinely thought, because this is how a sports fan's mind work, I thought the twin towers of Tyson Chandler and Eddie Curry. I thought you can't defend both those guys at the same time.
Hey, one of them turned out to be good on another team eventually.
Yeah, like 8 years later. Yeah. The point is, that's when I became a fan, right? And right now, Nick Wright is enjoying a close to unprecedented run of success with the Kansas City Chiefs. I went back to check this out. In his lifetime, they've never been bad for more than 2 years in a row. In the last, I think in his lifetime, they've averaged like 9.5 wins a season. And in the last 10 years, they have averaged 11.5 wins in a season, which is incredible, right? So I hope that he enjoys it, right? But that's not what being a fan is. And while those Buffalo fans are getting kicked in the teeth yet again, right, they are being fans. And I just think that every once in a while, it's good for a guy like him to be reminded that it's not always going to be so rosy for you.